On this week's episode of Crowdfunding Nerds, we review our 2024 predictions. What did we say? What came true? Who knows? We also talk about our 2025 predictions. Let's get into it.
Game begin.
Let's go.
Bring your pretty face to my ad.
Amazing.
Hey everybody, and welcome to another awesome episode of Crowdfunding Nerds. I am your host, Andrew Lone, and I'm joined as always by Sean and not Rick. This episode is all about our predictions for the year 2025, as well as a look back at our last prediction episode, which was a year ago. We predicted, we kind of do this once a year. We analyzed our predictions from last year on this episode, and we're going to talk about what several predictions for the following year. Hopefully you guys enjoy. You want to just jump right into it, Sean?
Well, last year we had a point scoring system, but I don't know if that actually works because it just kind of rewards people who make the most predictions rather than the correct ones. Maybe you have to lose points if you get your prediction incorrect. But I don't think I'll be winning because all my predictions pretty much didn't come to reality. But we'll examine that. But I mean, just to recap from last year's predictions. So, Andrew, your 2024 predictions was that we would see more people playing hobby level games, so there'd be an increase in the tabletop space. So that was one. Another prediction you had was that Deliverance Council the Fallen would raise $1 million. And then another prediction you had was that there would be an economic bounce back. You sort of argued that with the election year coming up, you sort of theorized that the Biden administration would try their best to sort of curb inflation and try and get people in good graces. And then finally, your prediction for 2024 was that gamers will continue to reject AI art, and that we wouldn't really see that taking much of a prominent place within the hobby space.
Yeah. Wow, what a meaty, thick list of predictions. I'll say one thing about so Deliverance raising $1 million. I mentioned actually last year. That is what I call my big, hairy, audacious goal. The goal that seemed so high, it's unreachable, but that I was shooting for anyway. So I thought I'm going to shoot for the stars and then I'll hit the moon instead. And I was actually very pleasantly surprised. We raised over $500,000 on our campaign, and what's crazy about that is that because so for us the last time we raised 314,000, we did just over 3 times that in total. So it raised over $1 million just in post campaign sales, and we made all of our add-ons and all of the additional base games, and we sold through all of those. And so Modifius Entertainment, I remember Chris Birch talking to me about their games, and there was one game that we thought we should have done better. This is a number of years ago, and he mentioned, we're not really hoping that our game is going to smash on crowdfunding so much. We expect to get most of our sales in retail. And he said like 2/3 of their sales will come later in retail, and they had a very respectable number. I'm like, okay, yeah, this is going to be okay then, and I actually noticed the very same thing with my first campaign. And so I expect, based on just if the numbers are to hold true, I expect we will do about 1.5 million overall. Now the $1 million Kickstarter eludes me for now, but we increased by a lot, and I'm pretty happy with that overall. It's tough, it's a lot of work to try to get a bunch of money raised for a game, especially one that you don't manage to just strike and go viral, where you really work for it and you earn every bit of every pledge, versus kind of a getting lucky. So I find the performance I was really happy with the performance, but I didn't make $1 million. So,
well, it kind of ties into your other prediction for 2024 that there would be economic bounce back. I suppose you didn't really see that come to play. I think inflation has had an impact on a lot of people around the world. Everyone's kind of feeling the prices come down. And in fact, I compared just this is by no means extensive, but I did compare the top 10 highest grossing projects of tabletop projects of 22, 23, and 2024.
Mhm.
And we've seen pretty much a sharp decline. So just to give people some perspective, the top 10 highest grossing projects of 2022 totaled 44 million. The highest grossing projects of 2023 grossed 40 million. And we saw the same in 2024 of 40 million. In fact, we saw the only difference between 2023 and 2024 was a $3,000 difference. But then if you take into account inflation, which is probably about 5%, it actually is a dip. We are seeing it slightly lower. And that, again, this is by no means extensive. I only looked at the top 10 highest grossing. And again, you have like, what was that one by Brandon Sanderson this year?
The Stormlight Archive RPG, or what is the
Yes,
Cosmic
yeah.
RPG?
And that kind of essentially boosted a lot of the 2024 numbers, because it wasn't looking too great. Apart from that came in, and that was one of the highest funded projects of all time on Kickstarter currently. So yes, and again, I'm only looking at Kickstarter here. I'm not looking at GameFound and all the other platforms. So it's by no means conclusive, but it does sort of give you a bit of an idea of the trends, that we are seeing certainly a decrease in some of these bigger projects. We aren't seeing as many of these big projects do well. Oh, actually, I wonder what the average is. Might be good to work out quickly here what the average of the project was.
It is true. So you're looking at if you're looking at tabletop analytics, rather, it's going to show it's not going to include GameFound. GameFound does have big projects. For example, Cyberpunk 2077. I want to say it raised $7 million or so, and is the biggest project outside of the Brandon Sanderson Cosmere. So if you wanted to make, let's say, go board games for board games, the numbers will be a little bit different. But in general, what I found is that the numbers of projects dramatically increased. We're talking about like 40% more projects launched, versus the year before. And the relative amount of money, it increased, as far as like the overall amount of money put into hobby or to like crowdfunding, but it's been split across Backerkit, GameFound, and Kickstarter. So overall, Kickstarter's numbers are going to look lower because GameFound took a $50 million bite out of Kickstarter's numbers, and Backerkit took like a $10 million bite. And so it's very interesting, I think,
good point,
to see what's happening here. But in general, if you look at the number of projects launching, it's like, I mean, 1,400 more projects or 1,500 more projects than the year before. It was like a really high number, and we're talking about normally there are like 3,000 projects or 33,000 and change projects, and now there were like 4,500 projects launched, and so that was a really absurdly high amount. And this kind of pulls me into another. Well, I made a prediction that I was incorrect, but it wasn't based on no evidence or the economic bounce back. I actually thought that we would start an economic bounce back earlier in the year, and I think, after the presidential election, I predict that maybe it was in a different episode, but I predicted that due to the economic conditions, you would have a switch from Democratic leadership to Republican leadership in the United States. And that actually happened. And there was a big, Bitcoin went nuts and the stock market went nuts and whatever. But I don't think that those things are necessarily indicative of the economic, the economy for people. What I actually thought would happen is that Biden would find ways to lower gas prices, find ways to lower the price of eggs and basic necessities that are found in lots of ingredients, and that way people's money would go further and they would stop being angry about the economy. But that didn't happen at all. That was actually one of the biggest surprises. It almost felt like there was a little bit of war happening within the Democratic Party, and there was a lack of anything done in my view, to lower basic necessities. So there was no economic bounce back at all, and it just made people more angry. And the fruit of that frustration, I believe, is found in what happened in the U.S. election. Every single thing that could go to Republicans basically did. And so I think now is a great opportunity for an economic bounce back. I know, Republicans want to drill for oil, and that generally should decrease the cost of gas, which a lot of people, if you're not making the connection, the United States economy generally runs on people buying stuff, and
And war.
and war. Yeah. And both of those things actually run on gas. So you've which is gnarly to say. But gasoline, the price of gasoline and diesel, it powers the trucks that drive the interstates in the United States to get products from one place to another. And so the cost of basic groceries, the cost of board games, the cost of everything, it is all directly impacted by the cost of gasoline. And I thought, that we did have significant gas price spikes and whatnot, and it did go down a little bit, but not enough to make a meaningful difference. And so, yeah, I definitely didn't get that right. But I thought, I don't know, I felt like there was a good opportunity for the Biden administration to make a good or to kind of change people's minds in the last year, and it just they didn't. So
So we can label you a false prophet.
I guess. Please don't stone me. But I will say, though, the other part of this is the economic bounce back causing more people to buy games. I actually do think this is probably the most correct part of my predictions. This particular prediction, because you have the economic increase, and I think that as a result of the inflation. As a result of inflation, people are not buying big expensive things. So you're not having as many, people aren't buying new cars, they're not buying new homes, and those types of things. People are saying, well, I'll never be able to afford those things. So people, as is a trend for the last several years, people are looking to purchase experiences. And they're saying, well, let's grab a board game because that's going to be a little win in kind of, a notch on the belt of life, where I know I don't have a house right now because they're outside of my reach, but I can do this, which will increase my enjoyment in life and whatnot. I do think that is reflected in numbers. In fact, Hasbro recently posted very, very poor numbers. Hasbro lost money in their movies, they lost money in their toys, and the only consistent thing about Hasbro at all this year was really their tabletop games. Tabletop games, so everything decreased except tabletop games generally remained the same. And that is, there's a lot to be said for that in the midst of the inflation and whatnot. We're seeing decreases everywhere in, from the number of people going to see movies to, people are spending less money. Or generally the money that they are spending is not going as far. But tabletop games remaining the same as it was in 2023 from a big company like that, and Asmodee, I think, is the same, very similar. That says a lot about the number of people getting into the hobby, and because the same amount of money generally is being poured into the hobby as was last year, when money isn't going as far. And so that's actually a really good thing for the future of the hobby. I would actually repeat this prediction for this year. I think that I was a year ahead of my time for this one, and I do think that
Just not letting it go.
Yeah, I think as inflation kind of is curbed, that we, as we kind of continue on an upward trend or go on an upward trend from a recession, that the tabletop games industry is going to experience a dramatic boom. So it's a good time, I think, to be a creator with a passion project. So anyway, don't mean to get too far ahead of myself, but
one thing you got right was gamers will continue to reject AI art in games. I don't think we've seen a massive change in opinions around AI art. I don't see a lot of games releasing using AI art. We had a couple, and people were quite transparent about that, but I don't see it sort of being a common practice. I'm sure it's probably been used more behind the scenes for like concepts that artists are then taking and kind of expanding upon and making their own. So it's probably just a way to like do mood boards or concept generation or something like that.
Yeah,
But yeah,
yeah. So
we weren't really seeing a lot of finished work using AI art.
yeah, I think that AI art is associated with low effort, and gamers are generally rejecting low effort projects. It's one thing that I, as a fan, when I see something that has AI art, I think this game is probably not play tested very much. It's probably not that good. And the art is just another kind of aspect of the low amount of effort that this person put into this game, and
I think a lot
so
of AI
yeah.
art suffers from the problem of looking like AI art as well.
Mhm.
It doesn't really have the ability to have its own style. It all sort of has this sort of samey
Yep.
look, and I think that's one of the problems is that people can just instantly spot it and say, "Okay, that's AI art." As
Yep.
yes, it's got this kind of style, and usually there's some type of artifacts which particularly hands that don't do very well. So
Yeah.
that's probably part of the issue as well.
Yeah. It's and then also like general positioning of people, it's always people focusing on a single central object or one person doing a thing. And it's like very in a lot of ways very generic. Like you
Mhm.
said, there's not a particular sense of style to the game. Like one thing I love, for example, is they recently released Lord of the Rings um Duel. It's a game that plays off of Seven Wonders Duel, very very similar, and the art pieces on the individual cards, you can actually set them right next to each other, and there you can display entire battle scenes in using various cards. It's very cool, and there's just that little extra effort, I think, is rewarded by those who get the product, and that's one thing that people really appreciate. They honestly, I believe that people value art and things over inserts and storage solutions and whatnot, and quantity of content. I think the quality of the content is so much more important to gamers. And to myself, I'm looking for like a very premium product. I don't just want to play a game that has you know fancy parts. I want to play a game that's really well thought out, and the art is a huge piece of what makes a game feel premium to me. And I think that other backers kind of generally feel the same way. And in addition to that, there is this sentiment of the artists are getting hurt by AI art, because if you don't have to pay an artist, then you're just kind of cutting someone out so you can make more money or whatever, and that's not generally a good thing. And so I see this to kind of continue forward as a trend. If the game has AI art, it's still going to suffer generally, um, especially if it's just a low effort. Oh, I can just use AI art instead of actually paying someone to do this. That's always going to be sussed out and punished heavily. But I do think that AI art is going to become much more prevalent in the artists themselves will be working with
Mm,
AI art much more often. That's something that I kind of
I think so.
see. So
Like
I'm
we
already
saw
seeing
this.
that with my artists. They're using concepts instead of using sketch pads for concept art. They're actually just kind of using a bunch of AI art and figuring out, okay, what artistic direction do we want to go? What colors do we want to use? Like what shapes are we going to use for the various components, and how should we display the characters? And like one game I'm working on, I have chips that I'm using, like kind of like poker chips, and so the art on the poker chips, if they had like a circular, generally like a circular shape, or the focal point can be fully expressed inside the circle of a poker chip as the art piece, then it's going to do a whole lot better. It's going to look like it belongs versus having a character that really needs like a portrait shape. Putting that into like a poker chip is going to be weird. So we're using a like Mid Journey to figure out just some initial exploratory shapes and style of art and other things like that. But then all the art has to be, fully hand painted or whatever, painted by an artist versus, you know,
Yes, so it's
and
almost like
nothing
a
unique.
more sophisticated Google search where you would kind of do Google searches to get references, whilst with this, you're
Mhm.
kind of generating it through artificial intelligence.
Right. Yeah. So it does save 10 to 15 hours a piece for us sometimes. It's can be like a huge time savings. And like for our deliverance characters and whatnot, that can be a significant saving of time, effort, energy, um, which allows me to pay my artist to do more work, and so I can actually what I've done is I now pay my artists more money because they're generating more, and so they're worth more, you know. So that's the net change in my life from us using AI art. So and my artist did express some concern about, hey, I'm able to get a lot more done if I use this, and I just am worried that I'm going to be, um, you know, maybe you won't need me for as many hours as you use me, and so we kind of talked about that, and um, in general, it's I'll told him I'll use you as many hours as you've got. So we just have to figure out how to kind of run at a faster speed, you know. So
Cool. So some of my predictions, which I think this year I'm going to be a lot more uh, mild in my predictions because they seem to all not come true. I suggested there would be larger or big projects or big IP projects on GameFound, and there were a couple last year or this year. So we had Cyberpunk 2077, the board game launch on GameFound that has done very well, and then another one was Heroes of Might and Magic. But in terms of this year, if you look at the top 10 highest grossing games of all time on GameFound, only three of them were from 2024. So we didn't really see, 2024 as an explosive year for GameFound, and like in terms of taking over the top spots of a lot of those
Mhm.
places. Only three of those places were taken from this this year 2024. So I don't think that prediction really worked out too well. Yes, we saw some, but it wasn't like this explosion of big IPs launching on GameFound and people trying to tap into that market.
So yeah, it was interesting to me to see what happened with GameFound this year, and I do think that there's a lot to be said about, for example, uh, these like larger IP products or companies like Chip Theory Games and um, Simon and other large companies known for big projects. There, it was GameFound is not like the problem source of lower funding. I believe that the economy is, and generally projects that ask for more or, higher amounts of money per pledge, those are things that will suffer. I think that's across the board, regardless if it was GameFound or Kickstarter. But I think that um, it's hard to say if GameFound was a problem, but it's easy to see a project, for example, like Dwarven Forge. They did, their campaign on GameFound and raised way less money than they did on Kickstarter. But we're seeing a lot of that across the board on Kickstarter and GameFound, where no matter where you launch, you're going to make less money at the high end, and that is generally if for example, like we have a 40 million dollars raised in the top 10 projects on Kickstarter and GameFound. If you did only board games, then this year, so like instead of RPGs, you would have a much lower number this year than last year. In fact, I want to say the lowest, if you just go top 10 as in tabletop games, you get your lowest number is something like $1.4 million or something, is your 10th place. But then if you go with just tabletop games, it might be like 2.5 to 3.5 million was number 10. So there's a much lower number, and in fact, you'll have a number of projects that made the top 10 that were that raised under $2 million in 2024. So it's the total is much lower than the previous year as far as like the high end of projects. And I think that that's just like a universal truth, whereas we had some really incredible, huge projects in 2022 and 2023. So, yeah, so I'm a little torn on GameFound as as a company at the moment. Like, what are they offering that is better than Kickstarter, and is that something that people should jump on, if they're in the right circumstances? I'm just kind of thinking through and deciding where I sit on it. I felt like Kickstarter was 51% and GameFound was 49% when I launched Deliverance. So I chose Kickstarter because 51% it made the difference for me, And then we got Project We Love, which is what we really needed on Kickstarter. And so, I think we did as well as we could have at the time. But I do think that if we simply had a different economic year, Deliverance could have been, instead of 500,000, we could have raised 750. Maybe, we had a lot of our people, much more than normal, said that they just couldn't afford it because it was a higher ask. And, so that was something that I felt too. But I think maybe next year it could be very different. But, we'll have to see kind of how that goes. So anyway, what other predictions did you make?
So I had one about Deliverance. I had a prediction that we would get on the hotness list again during the live campaign, but unfortunately, I don't think that actually happened. Do you know how high you got during the live campaign?
I think we made we might have cracked the top 10, but yeah, it did not work out the same this campaign versus the last time. In fact, the truth is, I want to say last campaign we ranked at number 4 on the hotness list, but where we reached number 1 was when we actually released the game. That we hit number 1 for a pretty, I want to say 9 days, something like that.
Yeah.
And I thought, yeah, let's, like, I really made an effort to go for it. And what I learned was, because we made an expansion campaign that really required the base game to play, it wasn't a standalone game, and therefore it's a lot harder to make a game like that trend on the hotness list. It's just a little bit more difficult. So for a number of reasons. But so yeah, we definitely tried. I think we paid $1,600 for a contest, that those really aren't worth the money unless you are planning to rank on the hotness list. But if you rank, let's say if you rank 10th on the hotness list on your own, the board game or the contest will bump you to number 1. Totally will. So the problem is that contests fill, the demand for contests is rather high. So if you were to try to jump in when you were ranked 10, you're not going to get a spot. So you kind of have to predict, do we stand a chance of ranking? And, so that's what we did. It just didn't end up working out for us. So, so what else you got?
My final prediction for last year was that we would see more religious themed games. My assumption was that in the past years we've seen a couple spring up with Bedouin Games, The Flood, and I suppose he released the Tower of Babel this year, and then also things like Deliverance. I figured there would be a lot more people coming in through the back on the back of those projects trying to release them. But so we did see a couple. We saw the Tower of Babel, and then we also saw, I suppose, your expansion, which I suppose we're not going to count in this. And then there was one called the Great Commission card game, which I think is another. Those are the only ones that come to my memory. So yeah, we saw some, but I don't know if it was to the sort of volume in which I was predicting this time last year.
Yeah, what was interesting is that there actually were some. This might not be so far off, because Ezra and Nehemiah came out in 2024. That was a very popular game. I want to say it's now rated at like an 8.3 on Board Game Geek, which is really high. And then there was another game. It was Jerusalem Anno Domini, I think is what it's Jerusalem, but I don't know why they put an I. I guess it must be correct in some other language. But then I want to say there were a couple of other games that were specifically religious themed that did very well, that hit, like Jerusalem hit number one on the hotness list. I want to say Ezra and Nehemiah hit number one on the hotness list, and those were, I believe, Shem Phillips with Garful Games is a Christian, but he's always released just generally like secular games, but that one hit really hard. Like, people were saying, yeah, this is just a really good game. And same thing with Jerusalem Anno Domini. I don't really know who the people are that are behind that one, but I can say that there seems to be more appreciation for like historical themes that are biblical, and just generally more acceptance, people that are willing to jump in. And so I'm kind of saying you got to win on that one, in my opinion.
Okay. It's like
So
a soft win.
yeah, I mean, it's a small market, or rather it's a small group of designers that would make games like that, and then of the people that are making games like that, it's difficult to find somebody that is willing to put the work in to truly make a game like that good. So it's a tough equation to, or I guess a tough code to follow or crack or whatever. So
Now, Richard had some predictions for this year as well,
okay.
which we can quickly go through. We should try to shoot them down. So he said that solo games will go up. He sort of theorized that people will want quicker experiences, quicker games, and that getting people to the table is becoming increasingly difficult. So he suggested there'll be an increase in solo games. So, well, I know that Gabe, if he has this solo games for one kind, he's doing solo game of the month. So I suppose in that context, yes, that's been very profitable and very worthwhile on GameFound. So yes, I suppose there has been a demand for solo games. It's not like it's gone away. That's been a very fruitful thing.
Yeah, I agree. I think solo modes in games are very, very important now. If you don't have a solo mode in games, you are going to be limiting your audience a little bit. If a solo mode makes sense for a game, you should have one in there.
Yeah.
It just makes sense. So
So
I think that's really important. Yeah.
Another thing he said is that he suggested we would see more Mickey Mouse games because the copyright would be lifted. And I think we just saw a bunch of Mickey Mouse memes. I don't know if we actually saw any people making games out of it. So I just
I
saw.
heard about some guy making a horror themed Mickey Mouse like video game. I don't know if that ever happened or not, but yeah, it seemed like, when Winnie the Pooh went public domain, there was that horror movie that, was all about Winnie the Pooh. But Lorcana hit, and I think in the tabletop space, it's so social that you can be shamed, like publicly shamed, for doing something that where you're just copying. And public shaming is a very powerful tool in the in the crowdfunding game space. And so I think that Lorcana just cemented in games that Disney owns this.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So he also suggested we would see more digital experiences, and he even suggested AR games. Don't know if that happened. Nothing comes to my mind of last year of having sort of a very digital focused. I think one of the appeal of board games is that they're not digital. I don't think people want, because people want to get away from screens and spend some time with friends and family away from technology. So I don't know if we'll ever see a huge rise in some type of digital overlap. I do think AR in games would be fun to play with. Kind of like, Star Wars with like their augmented reality chess set. That'll be fun. But nothing comes to mind in terms of that being true of this year.
Well, I guess I don't know how much it's increased, if at all, from over last year, but you have Tabletop Simulator, you have a boardgamearena.com, and there are, I want to say, Tabletopia and things like that. So there are digital platforms to play games. I do think that for me in particular, and my company, Tabletop Simulator is a very important way that we play test, because we can make things and rapidly prototype and rapidly test. But I'm not sure that like there's been a general public adoption of playing games on Tabletop Simulator. I think that people that know how to use Tabletop Simulator are more open to playing games just because they use it all the time. But I would say that I personally put more of a focus on Board Game Arena. I know that other games have apps, and like Ticket to Ride, they created their app and it was free, or maybe it was $2.99 or something like that. You had a lot of people that were playing it that had never played Ticket to Ride before, and it caused sales of Ticket to Ride to increase, because if you've experienced it and you liked it, then you're much more likely to actually purchase the game, because you already know the rules, and generally you think you know the rules, so you're just going to go for it, even though the computer like automates, or the brain behind the system automates so much. But so I think that it's, for me, it was kind of a natural next step that Deliverance needs to be on a digital platform so more people can experience it. And I think that that's I would say a standard for games that are more established, is to get a digital adaptation. But so I noticed that more of my community play Deliverance on Board Game Arena than I have a question that I ask every single week in our community, where it's like, what games did you get to the table this weekend? And after we released Board Game Arena, a lot of people, I kept seeing Deliverance on their playlist, and that was because of the Board Game Arena. It's just so quick and easy to get to the table. But I will say this, that to Richard's credit, I personally am thinking as a designer a whole lot more about how can I make sure that whatever game I make is quick to set up and quick to put away. Because, and for me, an hour at the table is a great amount of time. If I can stick to an hour at the table with 2 players, the game sets up in 10 minutes or less and tears down in 10 minutes or less, I think that it's going to be a lot more approachable to a lot of people, especially people that are, busy, either busy professionals or parents, or, that kind of thing. And so I do think that parents especially want to play things that are off screens, and that's a trend that is probably causing, it's actually cause for a future celebration probably for all tabletop game designers, because one of the things that we're noticing in digital is that there are fewer people spending money on those digital like freemium games, like free to play, but they're either pay to win, or you can buy extra, like in League of Legends. Yeah, exactly. Like you buy skins for your favorite heroes or whatever, those types of things. People are spending less money on those things, and it's like a huge drop. And I think that the fact that the tabletop game space has seen, I'll call it stagnation, but it's really that we're seeing roughly the same amount of money spent this year versus last year, is actually a really good thing, because so many industries that are involved in gaming are seeing much less money spent. And so it seems like a greater percentage of people's budgets are going toward tabletop games versus like the digital adaptations. So I don't know. I'm not sure if Richard's right or wrong, but I had thoughts.
So his final prediction was that he suggested that Twitch would become more of a platform for streaming tabletop games, which I don't think happened. So
Yeah.
that one's probably a fat no. So
Yeah,
we could probably move on.
Yep.
So I know you probably want to go into predictions for 2025 now.
Yeah. So I guess my first one is about AI rulebooks and AI art. The number of projects with AI rulebooks and AI art will increase, and people will hate it. That's my first prediction.
Yeah, I never thought about it impacting rulebooks. Yeah. Hey,
Rulebooks are really hard to get. A good rulebook that just that people understand is so much effort required. Going out of your your bubble, getting people to actually play your game, talking over the rules, being open-minded to how people interpret a particular rule, that takes a lot of time to kind of dial in. And it was really hard for me the very first game that I made, and everybody else that's making games, like the rulebook is the downfall. Even established companies. and I think that we're seeing a lot of shortcuts into AI art. I also think that Chat GPT is a much bigger thing than it was, much more, and there are others like Google's Gemini and whatnot. You're going to see AI have a much greater impact in rulebooks, and people aren't going to say anything about that. But when you get the game, you're going to be like, why is this rulebook weird? And it's going to be because AI explained it to you. So, and I don't know how we're going to measure that. Something I'm seeing, people using Chat GPT and stuff like Google Gemini, and I think Twitter X has some bot that they're working on, and
or Grok.
Grok, yeah. So
it's like a troll.
yeah, it's actually a pretty smart name, because it's like Grok is, you can grok something. It's like you have this inherent understanding of something without reading the rule book. That's what I always call it, grokking it.
Oh, okay.
So Elon Musk is like a super gamer. Evidently, he's ranked like top 20 in the world in Diablo 4.
I think that's propaganda. I think he's just there and LARPing, and someone's controlling the computer remotely or something. I don't know.
The guy's got money to pay people, so
yeah, he does. He has enough to like fool people. It's easier to fake it than make it. So if I was a billionaire, I'd probably would just LARP, pretend to be in front of a computer and just pay some pro to like play it on my behalf.
Yep, that's like I would get my kids to farm gold for me, back in the day on WoW, and it's like, yeah, if I was rich, like had billions of dollars, I'd probably take that to the next level. So
yeah, like someone's managing his Twitter account as well. I didn't see how someone who's a billionaire can have the time to like be like high ranked in a video game and also run multiple companies and tweet all the time. It's just like
rockets to space.
Doesn't make sense.
Yeah, it's definitely shaking things up. That anyway, that's not part of my predictions, but it's an interesting.
My prediction
topic.
is that Elon Musk will reveal himself to be an AI.
Yeah,
robot,
and the
cyborg.
Antichrist also.
So my 2025 predictions is that, one, I think we'll see less indie first-time projects funding. I think it's going to become increasingly tougher to get into the space. So that's my prediction. I think it's going to be just harder. And that kind of bounces off my second prediction, is I think we're going to continue to see the sort of overall reduction in funding amounts, the kind of overall the top projects kind of reducing, a bit more of a crunch. So I just think it's going to be a bit more competitive, a bit harder to kind of thrive on this space. But it'd be interesting to see if that's correct. So that's just from what I can see, what's happened over the past 3 years. You kind of see the number sort of shrinking and stagnating a bit. Mm-hmm. And I think I'm not necessarily confident that this coming year that inflation is going to be curbed in any real sense. So I do think that will play over to all areas of life, and including the tabletop space.
Yeah, I think that the number of projects increasing by such a high margin was an indication, the number of dollars, or the amount of cash people put into crowdfunding is going to be spread across a higher number of projects, which means that the number of backers per project, if there are many more projects, are going to be it's going to be spread thinner, and that basically means that less indies, first timers that have a dream that need 300 backers, it's going to be harder to get your first 300 backers as a result. And so I tend to agree with both of those predictions. I think that the counter to this is to level up your game, as in like your marketing game, your Kickstarter page, your the amount of time and money that you invest into your email list. I think that the way that you differentiate yourself, it's gonna be a little bit harder. There's a higher bar, so it
being unique.
Yeah,
I think your gaming approach in terms of game design is you want to create games that don't exist yet, and I think that's what people need to think about. You don't want to just create a game that already exists. You just really put a new lick of paint on something. So knowing the market and then trying to create something that fits into the market in a unique way is going to be key, I think, in 2025.
Yeah, I think in some ways it's kind of the wrong approach to try to make money from a game. It's weird, but the idea is that you really need to make a great product and focus as like almost like an idealist on the quality of that product. And if that thing already exists in a different form, or if it exists in a better form, like for example, I really would love a great RTS that meets several really important criteria. I won't go over them right here, but I can't find one. And that does what I want it to do. And so I'm like, I just really want to play something like that. And so I think I need to make it because it doesn't exist yet. That's why I guess now I'm like a dog with a bone. I need to make it now. And if it did exist, there would be no need for me to work on it. I know that as a company, there's a need for me to continue to pay my employees and make money, and and in order to do that, you've got to make products. But I I I love being in the place of being an idealist that wants to make the games that I just really want to play. Not just the games that I want to see enter the world, but the games that I personally am a fan of. I think that that is a really important aspect of being a great designer and also being a great company. Like, I don't want to have hundreds of projects that I have made. I just want to have, 5 to 10 that are extreme, like best in slot. Each one have to be the best version of whatever it is that they are, because that's the one I want to play, and it's the best version that I wish existed. And hopefully, there are enough people like me that will want to, want to play that. So anyway, so that's
Great. So
my
that's all my predictions. I don't know if you have
Yeah.
anything else, but I think we've kind of covered everything from last year.
Yeah. Well, I've got a couple more. One relates to yours. So GameFound is going to increase the number of backers that they have. This is a prediction that I have about GameFound, that they are going to increase in backers and therefore increase in market share, but they're going to stagnate with large creators, which is going to we may be seeing a little bit of that now. I'm not quite sure, but the moment that a big creator or a few big creators go from GameFound back to Kickstarter, I think we're going to see more hesitancy for new creators to start on GameFound. And it's just, you know, I made this prediction that I thought GameFound would just eat up Kickstarter, and they kind of did this last year. But I think that there are going to be large creators that tried it and they're like, well, we didn't make as much money. Let's, maybe it's the economy, maybe it's not. Let's try Kickstarter and see what the difference is. And so I think that that's going to be something that GameFound in its sort of next phase has to deal with. But I do think that they are going to continue to increase in relevance with backers, which is at the end of the day, the only thing that matters. If you've got backers, then people are going to continue to use you. People are going to say, wow, this project made $2 million or whatever. And because GameFound actually has an audience, so that's another prediction that I have. Then my next is that large companies are going to freak out due to the threat of the Trump tariffs. So this is a real thing where Trump is going to, slap a 20% tariff on all products coming from China. A lot of people are scared about that. If yes, board games, that cost will be passed directly to the end consumer. The goal of these tariffs and this administration is to get the production to be in the U.S. so that we don't have to pay China, but we can have comparable services here in the US. I think based on what I saw in the last administration, the way that they dealt with China, I think that toys and games were in like the fourth stage of um of tariffs, I guess, is what they were at the time too. So they were taxing things like steel and imported cars and other things like that. And they had like four different phases where they were going to impose more tariffs that were harder and harder on, I believe the way that they structured it was US companies. So some of them would be harder on China, like the, stage 3, stage 4 would be harder on China, but also more impact on the US. So companies like, that make toys, plastic toys, they all come from China because China is basically the world's plastic manufacturer. And that is something that I think is, so this is part of this prediction. I believe that Trump is not going to put tariffs right away on toys and games. I believe that the threat of tariffs are going to cause large companies to lobby. I know Gamma is already kind of talking about lobbying against tariffs, which I don't think is a bad idea. I think it's a great idea. We don't want to make our games cost more money. But I do believe that large companies are going to have to kind of hedge their bets, whereas small creators are going to just that have a single passion project, a tariff that is not going to cause them to go out of business because they're not even, they don't have a bunch of expenses you would associate with a business like payroll and whatnot. I think that small companies have the best opportunity to penetrate the market with their passion projects because of the threat of tariffs. They're going to be there's going to be, from the bigger companies, there are going to be some adjustments to try to make sure that they survive, and that is going to be, they're going to stick with their money makers, the things that they know work, and there's not going to be as much innovation from larger companies. And I think that smaller companies are going to have an opportunity there. I don't know exactly how long that's going to be, but I think that we're going to see more kind of small company innovation and maybe some larger company stagnation due to the threat of tariffs. And while we're at it, I'll just kind of I'll throw out a prediction. I don't think that tariffs are going to be imposed in 2025 on toys and games. We'll see. See if I'm
Interesting.
wrong.
We'll see.
Yeah.
So we'll have to have a prize who got the most predictions right. I don't know who won last year.
I don't know.
We weren't keeping score.
Yeah.
We'll
We
give
didn't
that a
keep
miss.
score last year. Richard's not even on this year to
Yes.
yeah. We could talk trash on Richard though. I do also think I have two last things. So number one is that I guess number four, my fourth prediction is that tabletop RPG projects are going to experience like a wild west renaissance due to in part due to rebellion against Wizards of the Coast and their Dungeons and Dragons. I think that people are looking for other systems. This is actually something that we saw this year. There were several projects that we got to be a part of. One was Terry Pratchett's Discworld, which was really cool. That raised a bunch, but there are a lot of other projects that are doing well, including, of course, the Cosmere RPG. That one did really well, and I think that more is going to. There are more tabletop RPGs, more money to be made there than than ever before.
It's interesting because I think a lot of those have done well because they exist outside of the tabletop role-playing space. They're IPs that have been transformed into tabletop role-playing games, and I think that's the essence of their success. I was actually just recently talking to a big publisher in tabletop role-playing games, and they have the opposite opinion. In fact, they're actually now developing a board game because they just think they're easier to sell than tabletop role-playing games. So it'll be interesting to see how that one works out next year.
Yeah, I think new systems are tough to get people to adapt. If I understand the D20 system and you're getting me into like a 7D12 system, there are a bunch of different rules that I have to learn, and if I'm going to teach others, they're going to have to learn the rules, and it's like a big ask. And so when every single TTRPG company has a different system, it's a lot to ask. But companies like Modifius Entertainment, they have their 2D20 system, which when you learn it once, you can play Fallout, you can play Dune, you can play Conan, you can play Act on Cthulhu, whatever. And it's a really smart way that they went with that. And so it just makes it easier to sell a second product to someone else because they really don't have to relearn the system. And so I do think that it's difficult, kind of high barriers to entry because of the system. If you want to get people to relearn a system, you're going to have to, it's harder to sell. But yeah, so we'll see, see how that goes.
You have one more?
Yeah. So it's related to tribal marketing. So tribal marketing is this concept that I've been kind of beating this drum for the last couple of years. People want to get into tribes of like-minded people so that they are not victims in essence of micro events of kind of cancel culture. You see this very prominently in political circles where people that are of a particular political persuasion will surround themselves with like-minded people of that same group, so that when they talk about stuff, they can be in agreement. And
Like Reddit.
yeah, there you go. And yeah, you see a lot of people that kind of group together there. And I think that one thing that I found was where, I'm kind of in some ways there are a lot of people that kind of bridge gaps and are victims of cancel culture as a result. Not, for me, we had this one event. It wasn't massive, but it was like a thing where somebody didn't like the game that we made, and then someone else went and all ham figuring just sharing that, and that kind of went viral and whatnot. And it was something that I think is just part of, like, in a way, like a fact of our society. I do think that you're going to find more people on, and then of course, I experienced on social media a lot of people talking trash, and then it kind of had no negative effect at all on the campaign performance that we had. I wasn't a direct cause of any of this. It wasn't like I was trying to, stir the pot and do some rage baiting so that I'd make more money or something like that. But I think that any news is good news. Anytime that you are talked about, it's always a good thing. More people will learn about you. And the people that were hating on me would have never backed my game anyway. And so even though there was a lot of negativity talked about, there were it didn't have an impact on my consumers. The people, if I were to get involved and I were to be slinging mud and whatnot, I do think that would have a negative impact on my customers, where people would be like, "Oh, I thought you were above this, and evidently you're not." And so that kind of hurts my opinion of you. That is something that I think people are very scrutinizing. And I think that's just the way people are. But I think that this concept of cancel culture, it's really kind of a lot of the time, people that are victims of it are the ones that say stupid stuff. So stay off Twitter or whatever, stay off X, stay off anything that allows you to, like, just free form express your thoughts.
Be a
Like,
hermit.
say what's inside your head. Like, don't do that. How about don't do that?
Yeah.
So so I
Well, I
think
think
that
a lot of the problem is just how the internet's monetized these days, where people are incentivized to have more sensational, more shocking content to get attention, to bring traffic to certain websites and certain things. And Facebook and all these social media sites know this. This is why it's nearly impossible to get, they kind of suppress links that go off of their platform because they know that traffic is money. And, this is the same people try to do this on these platforms. They know that traffic is money, so they can get a lot of eyeballs on the certain place, but then you can grow your business. And so it's just, I think until really Google changes its ad model in terms of paying for impressions and sticking ads everywhere, I don't think you're going to see this change anytime soon, unfortunately.
Yep. So I guess I didn't really make a prediction, but I did say I think that the tribal marketing model, people that manage to get a group of people together into, like, I don't know, a Facebook group or a Discord server or whatever, that are like-minded, those people are going to be well rewarded for their marketing effort. If you can get people into a group where they're fans of your company or fans of your game, that is going to be well rewarded. And I do believe that that was a huge impact, had a huge impact on our Deliverance campaign. It gave anything that I said had more of a platform, and people that were willing to carry that message further just organically. And so I think that those that do this tribal marketing thing will be rewarded. If you foster a place that is focused on your products, it'll be great. And I do think that it's going to be harder to do as we progress with the wrong types of products. So if you have a game that's like a very lightweight game, and it's your thing that you're super excited about, if there's not a lot of depth and meat for people to kind of chew on, as I guess using this analogy, then it's going to be harder for people to want to gather around and discuss it. It's going to be less. It's not as interesting, if I like, there might be groups about Candyland, but I'm not really excited to talk about strategy for a game like that, versus something like Twilight Imperium. There are lots of, there's lots of strategy to discuss and a lot of opportunity there. And so I think that companies that have big games are going to, it's going to be easier for them. So that's kind of my
Well,
spiel on
Ryan
that.
actually just has some 2025 predictions that we can quickly touch on. It just says the last. So he says AI-powered robots will cook terrible hamburgers in national chains. And his last one is aliens.
Okay.
So we can look forward to that in 2025. Let's see
Yeah.
who's right.
Okay. I'm down. I guess I'm sure he'll score 1 out of 2. Not sure which one. So
Maybe
all
aliens
right.
be cooking the hamburgers.
Yeah. And one other thing, I think that we are approaching our 4-year anniversary on our podcast. This is did we pass it already? I don't know. I mean,
Probably in
episode-
January. I think January is when we started.
Yeah. I mean, technically, I guess it'd be episode 208, which I think we just released. So anyway, well, happy 4-year to us. And here's another prediction: is that we're going to be around next year. So how about that? Hopefully we can get one final prediction in there. That's good. I guess we should probably end there because I have more to say about things that we aren't yet ready to talk about.
Ooh, exciting.
So, yeah.
All right. Well, Robot Richard, do your thing.
Well, that's all the time we have for this week's episode of Crowdfunding Nerds. For more resources, articles, and to listen to past podcasts, please visit us at crowdfundingnerds.com. And if you have a crowdfunding question, we also have a page on our site where you can send a message directly to us. Please visit crowdfundingnerds.com/question. And if your question is a great question, we may include it in a future podcast. Thank you all again for listening to this week's episode, and we'll see you next week. Stay nerdy.